So in this video, we are going to talk about what is promise and how is it helping in achieving the asynchronous programming. And we are also going to keep JavaScript as a reference language in this video. Let's get started. Let's start with the real-time analogy to explain the concept of promise in JavaScript. Imagine you are applying for a job in a certain company and you are going to attend an interview in that company. So you took the interview. Once the interview is done, the recruitment team will tell you that they will give you a call back after a few days to explain the result of the interview, right? So usually that's what recruitment team would say after the interview. They will tell you that they will give you a call back after a few days. Now, basically, the recruitment team is giving you a promise that they will give you a call back after some time. So you have to trust that promise, you take that promise, and then you go back to your home, and then you start your routine life. So you go to your current work, you hang out with your friends, you start leading your routine life, right? And after a few days, the recruitment team will call you, and they will give you the result of the interview. And the result could be either positive or it could be negative. So you might get selected for the job, or you might get rejected. And if you notice here, so this is the moment that recruitment team is actually fulfilling the promise that they gave you a few days back, right? So they are actually giving the result of the interview. Now, based on the result, you have to take some action. So if you get selected, maybe you have to start preparing to join the company. And if the result is negative, you need to start applying for other companies, right? So based on the result of the promise, now you have to take certain actions. And this is exactly what happens in JavaScript when you do asynchronous programming. In programming, there are few situations where the function cannot complete immediately. It will take some time to execute and then it will complete after some time. Say, for example, you are writing a huge content of data into the disk as a file. And if the content is smaller, it might complete immediately. But if the content is larger, it will take some time to complete the file return process into the disk, right? So writing a file into the disk actually takes some time. Also, another example could be if you are making a network call to a remote server to get some content, that will also take some time based on the server availability, server location, or the server performance, right? So you will have some latency to get some data from the remote server. So basically, API call, again, it will take some time. It cannot be completed immediately. And another example situation could be, imagine that you want to execute a function after a certain period of time. So you might want to start a timer, and once the time is elapsed, you want to execute that function. So that is also another situation. So basically, these are some example situations, but there are a lot of other situations where the function cannot complete it immediately. It will take some time to complete. Now, how would we approach these kind of situations? So there are two ways to approach these situations. One is you can actually wait for the function to complete before you do anything else. So you can actually wait right there. Maybe, for example, if you are making an API call, you actually wait for the remote server to return the response, and then you focus on the other parts of the program. And that way of approaching this situation is called as synchronous programming. So synchronous programming is not recommended in JavaScript, especially in JavaScript, because we know that the JavaScript is single-threaded in nature. So when you do something that waits or blocks the current execution, you are basically blocking the single main thread of the application. So if it blocks or waits, then your application cannot perform anything else. So synchronous execution in JavaScript is not at all recommended. Now, how do we approach that? The second approach is when you do the functionality of any of these situations, right? So you don't have to wait for that function to complete. Instead, you request for the function and then you go ahead and focus the other parts of the program. And once that is complete, you will get a callback. So that's what we call as asynchronous programming. So this is the most recommended way to do in JavaScript. Always make sure that you never block the main thread in JavaScript, right? Now let's take one example from this situation, maybe writing the file to the disk, right? So let's see how that works. So you have a JavaScript code that actually talks to the JavaScript runtime to write the file to the disk. So you have a code where you are saying that this file needs to be written to the disk. You are informing that to the JavaScript runtime. And the JavaScript runtime will talk to the operating system to write the file to the disk. Now, when you request the JavaScript runtime to write the file, the JavaScript runtime will give you a promise object. So keep in mind here what is happening is the JavaScript is actually giving you a promise that it will write the file to the disk after some time. So the JavaScript code now have to trust that promise. It have to keep the promise object, and then it needs to go ahead and focus on the other parts of the program. So after the file has been written to the disk, now the JavaScript runtime will inform the code, will give a callback to the code. It will say, okay, that process is completed. It is the result of the promise could be either positive or negative. So it could say that the file has been successfully written, or as a negative result, it could say the file has some issues that it cannot be written to the disk, right? Maybe the file has been opened by other application or something. So basically, the JavaScript runtime is giving a callback to your code saying that the process has been completed. Now, your JavaScript code has to take some actions based on the result of the promise. So if it is successful, you do something else, or if it is negative, you do something else, right? So that needs to be handled by your JavaScript code. Now, remember our analogy. Initially, I told you a real-time example, right? So you go for an interview, and the recruitment team actually giving you a promise that they will give you a callback after some time. So that's exactly happening in the JavaScript runtime. It is actually giving you a promise object that will be resolved in the future. Now, this is how promises in JavaScript works. This is the overall flow of the promise. In the screen, what you are seeing is actually an example code that writes some content to the file. So in the first line, what you are seeing is we are requesting the JavaScript runtime to write some content into the disk. And that function actually returns a promise object. And in the second line, we are attaching the callback functions to the promise object. So keep in mind that we have to attach two callback functions, one for the positive result and one for the negative result. So you have to attach the positive callback to the then block, and you also need to have a negative callback for the error block. In case if some error happens, you need to handle that as well. And in the third line, we are actually acknowledging that the file writing request has been initiated. Always keep in mind, in the third line, the file writing operation is not yet completed. The request just been initiated. The file writing operation will be considered completed only when the callback functions are executed. If the file is written successfully, then the callback function attached to the then block will be executed. And if there is some error in the file writing operation, then the callback attached to the catch block will be executed. So this is the overall flow of how a promise-based function will be executed. And JavaScript also has these keywords like async and await, which you can use to make this asynchronous programming more convenient, right? It's just a syntactic sugar. But I'm not going to talk about the syntax details of JavaScript in this video, but I'm going to give you some reference article links in the video description. You can actually go through that. So in this video, we talked about what is promise, and we also discussed about some examples to understand the concept of promise. I hope this video is really useful to you. Thanks a lot for watching.
Audio Jungle.